All right, I'm going to open the meeting of the MBTA zoning task force, Manchester by the Sea. It's October 26th at 6:35. We'll take a roll call. I guess I'll just go around the room. Denny Hall.
Here.
Sue Philbrick.
Here.
Sarah Mellish.
Here.
Richard Smith.
Here.
Sandy Bomber Turner.
Here.
Ann Harrison.
Here.
And I guess Michael Pratt is not here.
What about is Gar?
And Gar.
And Gar, where's Gar?
He's on the phone.
Oh, and Gar, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Yes.
Is
There you are.
Mr. Only here?
And I'm here also. Yes, thank you. Okay. So let's get started with the agenda. The first is acknowledged receipt of correspondence. Let's see, I guess there are some emails from Ms. Giovanni on the 13th, 16th, and 20th. Do we want to respond to any of these emails? Does anybody have I'd be glad to draft some responses and maybe we can share them at the next meeting.
Were they emails of just statements, or were they specifically asking questions?
A little bit of both.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why don't you draft responses and we can consider them at the next meeting. But we can also respond individually as long as we don't reply all.
Sure, yes, that's right. Okay, and I've sent out a revised schedule for everybody. One big item we need to discuss after the MIT presentations is trying to get the kickoff meeting scheduled. And I did get an email from Emily Innes with some suggested possible dates, so we can see if we can zero in on one.
That's great.
The next item is discussion of questions. So people have been answering the questions, which I think is great. I wasn't expecting responses yet, but.
Hey, it's on the list.
Check it out. But maybe it's time that we start trying to refine these questions and actually come up with some answers to some of them. I could try collating the responses I've gotten so far, and
That would be interesting to see.
We've also
You wanna
been
take
talking
the
about some of this in the zoning subcommittee.
that's true. We have.
So if somebody gets their act together and gets some minutes together, then that would help.
I don't know who that would
Well, collating the answers might be faster. No offense, Sarah.
Minutes will be done by our next meeting.
Sure, so why don't I take a stab at collating? I don't know if anyone's got any, I know Richard had some additional questions that you put on yours, which we should also be considering, and maybe taking some off because they're either superseded by what we've learned so far or
Yep.
or they're obvious or something has happened to them. So let me take a stab at that and for the next meeting.
Could you circulate Richard's questions?
Sure, I'll get Gail to circulate them, yes. Okay, well, with that note, I think we should probably turn to our student project here. And I guess what I'd like to do is introduce Jeff Levine, who is he's at the School of Planning and Architecture and Planning at MIT. Is that right, Jeff? Can you?
That's right.
And what I'd like you to do is start off by sort of describing what this project is all about and what the goal was, and then maybe start introducing the students, and we can go from there. Does that make sense?
Thank you. Oh, sure. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members of the task force. I'll be brief because the students are really the ones that I want you to hear from. So my name is Jeff Levine. I'm a lecturer of economic development and planning at MIT. But actually, I spent most of my career as a city planning official. I was the planning director in Brookline for 8 years and the planning director in Portland, Maine for 7 years. So I really come at it from a local government perspective, and I love working with local government on issues like this. So thanks for having us. This class is a class we offer basically every other year, And it's a way of MIT sort of giving back to the local communities that put up with our campus. And we define who puts up with it rather broadly anywhere in Greater Boston. And it's a way of providing some free technical assistance to communities that are looking for a little extra help on some project or another. And every year it's interesting. This year I sent out a request for people who were interested. I got 4 or 5 responses, and I spoke to Betsy at the time, and your project seemed like the most interesting. So the students are working with Manchester by the Sea this semester. This is a class that's a second-year master's student. It's actually fairly large this year. It's not usually quite so many students, but I think the interest was high this year. And the goal is to really come up with some recommendations that will help you and ultimately town meeting in your deliberations on MBTA Community Act compliance. So tonight is a presentation from the students with some of their initial analysis and thoughts. They want to hear from you. And then in December, there'll be some format of a final presentation, and I think that's still to be worked out between us and town officials. I want to hand it off in a second to Nineveh O'Connell, who's one of the students. But first off, I want to give a big thanks to town staff. Greg and the staff in Manchester by the Sea have been incredibly helpful and generous with their time. Gave us all the information we needed, showed us around, and I really appreciate that. It makes a huge difference, and you should be proud of your really professional staff in Manchester by the Sea. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Nineveh, and I will stay on and watch and chime in if necessary, but I don't think I'll need to.
Jeff, before you sign over, do you expect us to ask questions as we go along or after each presentation, or save everything to the end? How would you like this to unfold?
It's probably easiest to save things till the end, unless it's sort of a fairly basic informational question like, did I hear that correctly? But yeah, certainly I think they're looking forward to your questions. It might be easier to save them till the end generally.
Okay, great. Okay.
All right, Nineveh, take it away.
Hi, I'm Nineveh. To that point, also feel free to drop questions in the chat. We have a couple other students on Zoom, so they can help me any questions there if you're on your computer. And I will share my screen and do the classic check. Can you all see this?
Yes.
Amazing.
Yes.
Sweet. So I am Nineveh. I'm a planning student here at MIT, and we're really glad to be working with you this fall. And thank you for joining us today and bringing you into your meeting this evening. We're going to go over in this presentation our research in the housing background in Manchester by the Sea, and bring that into understanding of the MBTA Communities Act more broadly, as well as in this case of Manchester, and then thinking about how that might look in Manchester and potential visions for multifamily growth. Here is our larger than usual class, as Jeff mentioned. There are 18 of us coming from a lot of different backgrounds in terms of where we have lived and grown up and our professional backgrounds. We're all city planning students with also one fellow from Argentina. And we have a lot of interests in housing, sustainability, transportation, and equity. I'm Nineveh O'Connell, as I mentioned. I'm actually from central Massachusetts, and my town is also working on figuring out how the MBTA Communities Act works. So I'm really learning a lot from this conversation here in Manchester, and you'll also hear tonight from Emma and Scotty. So that was a brief introduction about us, and we actually, right now, the cameras can't see you super well, but if you're on Zoom and you want to engage with the raise hand function, or if you are currently visible on camera, you can go ahead and engage. But we were curious, just to do a quick poll, if you could raise your hand if you've lived in Manchester for 5 or more years. Just raise your hand. You can use Zoom or, yeah, lovely. Yeah, and then our next question is going to be, if you do not live in Manchester, and you might notice that everyone in this classroom is raising their hands, but we've all visited your town and are really enjoying this conversation.
Nineveh, we are having trouble hearing you. You're a little soft.
Okay, I will make sure to speak up. Can you hear me better now?
So we're gonna try to increase the volume too on our.
We're trying to do something on our end.
I can pause for a moment if that'd be good.
No?
Okay, just speak slowly and carefully and as loud as you can.
Okay, yes. Our last question, just as we were taking a quick poll, was just to check in and see how many people feel like you know the MBTA Communities Act well enough that you could explain it to a friend. So raise your hand if you feel like that fits you.
Yeah, we can all do
Nice.
that. What's the question?
Can you
So-
explain
Can
it
we
to your
explain it?
friends without snarky?
So many folks know it well, and hopefully we'll be repeating a lot of information for you and getting ourselves all on the same page. And for others, it might be the first time you're hearing some of the information we will go through today. Our class is a semester-long course running from September until the end of the year. And each year we work with a different community in the greater Boston area and are really excited to be working with Manchester by the Sea this year on compliance with the MBTA Communities Act. And we're really fortunate to be led by Jeff Levine and David Gamble as two really experienced planners in communities around New England. We've spent the last month and a half visiting the town with town representatives, which was really valuable experience, as well as time in the classroom brainstorming and map making and discussing how the MBTA Communities Act could work in Manchester and learning a lot about your community. Some things you may want to consider during our presentation are where you would most like to see new growth in Manchester and what characteristics of Manchester today are most important to you to preserve for Manchester tomorrow. Now I'm going to get into the background of housing in Manchester by the Sea and Massachusetts more broadly. So we've learned quickly that Manchester by the Sea is full of charm with the harbor and really old buildings of lots of different uses downtown. We visited the harbor, as I mentioned, right by the train station. The beautiful library, as well as Singing Beach. And in all of these places, we really enjoyed experiencing Manchester on our own, as well as talking to residents and learning about it in that way. In Manchester by the Book, it was really cool to flip through an old book about Manchester and see what community members have said in the past about what they love about Manchester, really centering often their experience in parks such as Lincoln Fields, Brook Street Field, and Muscogee Park, as well as a mention of how the train has played a role in Manchester's becoming the town it is today. Manchester by the Sea, in addition to having all of these lovely facets, faces challenges, as do all the other communities in Massachusetts. One thing in particular is that very few homes have been built in the last 20 years, which are those two boxes in the red or pink blocks. In fact, most of the housing was built prior to World War II, which is that really long bar you see there with over 1,000 housing units built before 1940. In addition to the age of the housing has gotten much more expensive over the past 20 years in Manchester. Here you can see that the cost of housing has increased across Essex County as a whole, but in Manchester in particular, it has reached one of the highest prices of the community in this region, with housing prices on median of over $750,000. Along with that, Manchester is becoming less accessible to lower and middle income residents, with the past 40 years seeing a decrease in the number of lower income households and an increase in the number of very wealthy households making over $150,000 a year. We should note that these figures are not adjusted for inflation, but the rate of increase of the median income of Manchester households increases faster than the rate of inflation over the same time period. In addition to income and housing prices, age is a particular interesting demographic in Manchester, with a rate increase recently in the 65 plus age group, such that in 2030, this age group is predominantly expected to be the predominant portion of the community's members, and a notable decrease in the school-aged children, which has been evidenced in school enrollments recently, with a decrease in enrollment by 200, which was noted in 2022 relative to school enrollments in the 2015-2016 school year. Thinking about the implications of these changes bring us to a lot of the values that Manchester has put forward in their housing production plan, and we can see that there are limited rental and starter home options for new young families and for children who grew up in Manchester to stay in the community and start their own families in the community. as well as difficulty for older residents to downsize from larger homes to more manageable properties that are friendly for disabled folks. So these are matters that Manchester recognized prior to the introduction of the MBTA Communities Act as matters that they needed to address in their housing stock, in your housing stock, to meet your own community's needs. And this is also a statewide issue and not only being felt by this town of Manchester. We see that in Boston, all around the North Shore, and across Cape Ann, folks want to stay where they've grown up and be able to have their own families there, but are having a really hard time finding suitable housing that they can afford and that meets their household's needs. So now I'm going to pass it off to Emma to talk more about how the MBTA Communities Act plays into Manchester's desires for their housing and demographics.
Thank you, Nineveh, and thank you everyone for joining. I just wanted to check that you can hear me all right.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes? Okay, great. So as she mentioned, I'm going to get a little bit deeper into what the MBTA Communities Act is and how it applies to Manchester's context. I recognize that a lot of this might be redundant to some of you. But as many of you know, this MBTA Communities Act was passed in 2021 to respond to the statewide rising housing costs and limited housing supply. And the solution that the MBTA Communities Act presents is to increase overall housing supply to better meet growing housing demand across the state. The way they do this is by establishing minimum requirements for multifamily housing zoning by right across the state's communities that receive different transit investments from the state. So because of the commuter rail, Manchester is among those communities that must comply with the law. And as you can see in this map, Manchester is not alone. All of the communities in turquoise must also comply. Notably, this act does not require that any housing actually be built, only that it be permitted to in zoning. And while affordable housing is certainly needed across the state, this law does not include any requirements for affordable housing. The underlying theory is, pure economics, that by increasing supply of housing, housing prices should naturally decline without the need to mandate affordability. So, as we've already sort of mentioned, the overarching objective of the MBTA Communities Act is to address the regional housing crisis, particularly as many populations are living, working, and traveling regionally. And it's actually transit systems that are a major reason why communities are able to live, work, move regionally. So this act has strategically targeted communities with transit systems, such as Manchester, as places where additional housing would be particularly beneficial, allowing for more affordable and sustainable patterns of regional mobility that reduce overall reliance on cars. And while the act is statewide and has specific requirements, which we're going to get into in just a second, it also allows flexibility in where communities want the multifamily housing zoning to go, creating an opportunity for you all to have a dialogue about where you collectively want to divert. So as Nineveh mentioned, prior to the MBTA Communities Act in 2020, Manchester actually published its own housing production plan, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, acknowledging many of the housing challenges that we've already covered. The plan included several strategies that would increase housing production similar to the objectives of the MBTA Communities Act. Strategies are listed there, but I will read them anyways. So the first strategy being to modify the multifamily and accessory dwelling unit requirements to make them easier to develop. Secondly, to pursue mixed use and transit-oriented development. And third, to support small-scale infill development and conversions. So ultimately, we believe as a class that the MBTA Communities Act is an opportunity to meet Manchester's housing goals that were already identified in your 2020 housing production plan. So now that we've talked about what the Act intends to do, we can get into a little bit more about what its requirements are for Manchester. So to comply with the Act, Manchester needs to rezone 39 acres to permit multifamily housing by right to reach a minimum average density of 15 units per acre. 40% of the total acres that are rezoned should be within half a mile radius of the train station. Half of the acres that are rezoned, or the districts should be contiguous. And then for the other, any additional acres that aren't part of that contiguous block, the minimum acreage is 5 acres. And then finally, the cumulative housing, or the total units that would be permitted, including existing current units, would be 585. This is some simple math of 39 acres multiplied by 15 units per acre. So while 39 acres may sound like a lot, a variance zone is really very small relative to the town size. It's less than 1% of the town's area, total area. And then focusing specifically on the requirement of having almost 16 acres within the half-mile radius of the train station be rezoned, that's also really a drop in the ocean. It translates into just 3% of the total area needed to be rezoned. So given that we're talking a lot about rezoning, we just want to review your current zoning map, and in particular would like to call your attention to the area that's in turquoise, which is within the half-mile radius of the train station, and which I think many of us would recognize as the downtown area. This is the area that's currently zoned as the general district, or zone G, where 2-unit housing is already permitted by right, and more units would require going to the zoning board of appeals. And in fact, this general district has residential density already quite high at nearly 13 units per acre, which is just shy of the MBTA Communities Act requirement of 15 units per acre. The rest of the town does not permit multifamily housing in its current zoning, though as you'll see in the subsequent slides, there is a lot of existing multifamily housing and density across Manchester that aren't technically permitted in the existing zoning bylaw. So here we can see in the different shades of pink that there's a lot of existing multifamily housing around Manchester, mainly within the half-mile radius of the station. That's also where this map is zoomed in on. But there is also multifamily housing outside of it, but again, wouldn't be permitted by the existing zoning bylaws. And then within the category of multifamily housing, there are many different forms and sizes that this housing can take. All of these examples are within the half mile of the train station, and all of them, despite their different styles and sizes, blend in with the town character and actually are essential to what the town character is. So in addition to the multifamily housing that Manchester already has, there's also moderate levels of residential density that are close to or even exceeding the density requirements of the MBTA Communities Act, which again is 15 units per acre. Like we saw with multifamily housing, most of this density is concentrated within the half-mile radius of the train station, though there are some examples of parcels outside that are pretty dense. Just wanted to zoom in on this neighborhood that's near the train station, bounded by Summer Street, Beach Street, and Union, Washington. And this has an average density that is over 15 units per acre, just barely, which meets the MBTA Communities Act. And importantly, we wanted to highlight that this density is achieved through a variety of housing types, all actually basically right next to each other. This includes a combination of single-family homes, and different types and sizes of multifamily homes, including some homes that you wouldn't necessarily know have multiple units, like the house in the middle, for example, that has 3 units. To many of us, it may not seem that way. And some of the existing houses far exceed the density requirements in the Act. So this yellow house on the right that I think everyone has passed by if you go to Manchester by the Sea, this has 7 units sitting on a parcel that's 0.16 acres, which translates into a density of nearly 46 units per acre, or 3 times the density requirement that's in the MBTA Communities Act. So we've thrown around a lot of numbers, but I think it might be helpful to just visualize and see what the sizes we're talking about, some acreage, using some examples from your town that hopefully you're familiar with. So the Town Hall Plaza, for example, is just over 1 acre. Getting a little bigger, the Masconomo Park is a little over 6 acres. So you would need about 3 of these, 3 Masconomo parks to meet the act requirements for having one zoning district be contiguous. And then finally we get to the 39 acres, which, again, may sound and look like a lot, but isn't too large when put into context with other land uses in the town, such as the golf course, which is over 3 times as large as all the area that needs to be rezoned. So with all of this context and analysis in mind, we want to take a moment to establish our guiding principles that inform the planning strategies that Sally's going to talk through in a second. Firstly, we want to meet the objectives of the MBTA Communities Act, which is to support transit-oriented development that directs housing growth in areas that enhance the walkability, connectivity, and vibrant nature of Manchester by the Sea. Secondly, as a coastal community, we cannot ignore the realities of climate change and sea level rise. We want to be cognizant of the flood risks of different areas that may be rezoned for multifamily housing, and consider what types of flood mitigation strategies might be necessary in different sites. We've also seen how special Manchester is to members of your community and recognize that a greater stock of diverse housing may be necessary to ensure that there's housing to meet the changing needs of folks who want to call Manchester home, including, the young folks settling down and creating families, to older folks looking to downsize and maybe live with caregivers. And finally, we believe that consistent and meaningful community engagement around this topic is critical. We do certainly acknowledge the limitations of our abilities, given that we're not from your community and we're only part of this work for a semester. But we do hope that our involvement and this meeting, for example, are one small but meaningful steps in the broader community engagement and planning process. I'll turn it over to Sally to talk through our initial ideas on how Manchester can meet the requirements of MBTAs.
Everyone, So based on what Emma just shared, we have prepared 2 potential planning strategies. And
Can you
this
hear?
one's very
No, I can't hear.
No, we
Can you
can't
speak
hear
louder,
you.
please?
Can't hear you.
1 second, we're switching microphones.
Okay.
Okay, great, thank you.
Hi. Sorry, can you hear me better?
Yeah,
Yes,
that's
much better.
very good.
Okay, great. Sorry about that hiccup. But going back to our strategies, we put together 2 strategies that Manchester could consider, and wanted to just keep in mind that these 2 strategies represent 2 ends of the spectrum, where we concentrate the density of the new zoning requirement within the half-mile radius from the train station, while the other one is where we keep the minimum requirements within the half-mile radius and allocate the rest outside. And I'll kind of go through the details of what these sites represent and some questions that you can think about as we go through the strategy. So the first strategy is where we concentrate all the density within the half-mile radius, and you can see that they're located near Summer Street, the MBTA station area, Sawmill Circle, and School Street. And a question that I want to propose that you think about and keep in mind as we go through the first strategy is what might be the outcomes of increasing the density within the downtown core. The first strategy has a lot of strengths. Is where we can really take advantage of the vibrancy and the density of the downtown area that already exists. And these areas already have some multifamily housing. Some are non-compliant, so that will require some changes. But while we're meeting the requirements, we're really taking advantage of these strengths. And the first site that we've considered is the one located near the train station. Because of its proximity to the to the coastal lines, there is some higher flood risks, but this area already has a high density that would meet the requirement of the MBTA Communities Act, while the proximity to the train station and the shopping center as well provides some advantages to the community members. And the surface parking lot area that's already existing could be really revamped to actually increase the community serving benefits with some zoning changes that might follow. So as you can see, and as you already experienced, this is some pictures that we took of the surface parking lot at the shopping center. There's also the gas station at the intersection of Beach and Summer Street. So wanted to share these pictures with you so you can locate where we're looking at and what we're seeing. And as you'll see, many of the sites currently do not meet, from the other sites as well, currently will not meet the 19.5 contiguity requirement on their own, but together with as a strategy as a whole, they'll help meet the combined contiguity requirements. But this site specifically currently has 111 units, but it's nearly only half the density requirement. So with the size and where it's at right now, there's a great potential to meet of using the seemingly developable area to meet the MBTA Communities Act requirements. And the second site that we focused on is on Summer Street. The current zoning of general district allows for multifamily housing, but it's not as of right. And like the other one that we just discussed, it has a really great advantage of being proximate to the train station, and is situated farther enough from the shorelines that it's more protected from coastal flooding if it were to happen. And currently, we can see a lot of larger buildings with both commercial and residential uses. And where this site, all of it appears to be developable, but the current density is only about a third of the density requirements. So it being already zoned for possible multifamily housing development is a great opportunity to use both of those advantages to help meet the compliance requirements. And like the Summer Street site that we just reviewed, the Sawmill Circle area already has existing multifamily housing stock, and like in many mixed-use neighborhoods that we can see in Manchester and throughout New England, proximity and walkability to downtown core that follows multi-use is a key advantage. And this area is somewhat protected from coastal flooding, but we have to keep in mind that because of its proximity to Sawmill Brook, there are some flooding risks as well. And as you can see in the pictures here, there's a mix of newer duplex housing developments, but there's also a bigger multifamily housing development that you are probably well aware of already. And as you can see, a great majority of the site appears developable, and because of the existing multifamily housing stock, the current density is almost at meeting the compliance requirements. So this site would only require a slight adjustment to make sure that as a strategy, as a combination of sites, that it will meet the MBTA Communities Act requirements. And finally, for this strategy, we've looked at some parcels near on School Street. This site has a really close proximity to the Terra Montessori School, which is great for younger families who are moving or are thinking of returning back to Manchester to be with their family. It's also proximate to the train station and is most distant from the Sawmill Brook or the shorelines compared to the other sites that we just reviewed. So it's more protected from flood risks. And as you can see, there's currently some larger surface parking lot spaces, which is a great opportunity for us to consider for infill development that's already existing there. So this site specifically, all of the area appears developable, and the current density doesn't meet the requirement, but it has a lot of potential to meet the MBTA Communities Act more easily. So with the first strategy, there are some implications that we do have to keep in mind, because we're concentrating the density within the half-mile radius. One is that we have to be very sensitive to preserving the town's character as we allow permit development. And as we've discussed so far, especially by Emma, that is possible while meeting the requirements and preserving the historic town character. We also would need to balance residential and commercial parking demands, and mixed use could be a key in this, where we can encourage, as we've seen in other New England towns, where first floor commercial uses could be taken advantage of and really amplify the town character. And this strategy as a whole really provides us an opportunity to think about how we can diversify the housing needs while meeting the town residents. There's room to consider embedding senior housing or more family-friendly units with the potential for infill development. So this is one way we can imagine how this strategy could look like. We are referencing, Kennebunk in Maine, Newport, Rhode Island, Montpelier, Vermont, Mystic, Connecticut, and these towns, and with Manchester by the Sea, these towns really characterize the history and charm of New England coastal towns that people typically think of, and Manchester by the Sea already embodies. So we think the strategy could be an example of meeting the act requirements while amplifying the town's the advantages. So moving on to the second strategy, where we are distributing the density beyond the half-mile radius while still meeting the minimum 40% allocation. So the major strength of this strategy is that we take full advantage of using the whole of the town. And something that we can think about while we're going through the strategy is, how can we make sure that all of the town residents, whether they're closer to the downtown core or farther away from it, be connected? And if we are allowing for more distribution of the density, how could these new denser areas be impacted, or the areas around it? And it's a good comparison point where you can measure the advantages, disadvantages of spreading or clustering the sites that I'll be going over right now. So the first site is near Bridge Street, and due to the proximity to shorelines, this site is more vulnerable to coastal flooding. And related to that, some areas in this site are subject to the Chapter 91 Phillip Highlands restrictions, but because it is such a large area, there's a big opportunity for zoning that allows for hidden density, where we can increase density drastically without disturbing the town's historic character. As you may have already seen, there's existing multifamily housing on this site. And as you can see, there's a common thread here where if there are some larger surface parking lots, we can really use that as an opportunity to expand community serving benefits more broadly. So this site specifically, majority of the site appears developable, and the currently low housing density, like I iterated just now, can be improved drastically with minor zoning changes. And accompanying that is our final site located on Old Essex Road. Is situated farther from the coast, so it's not as vulnerable to coastal floods, but because of its somewhat proximate location to Sawmill Brook, there are still some flooding risks, and related to it is also more distant from the train station and the downtown area. So the question about connectivity is rising here, but kind of similar to the Bridge site, it is a very large area that allows for easy compliance for the MBTA Communities Act. So currently it's mostly used for single-family residential uses, which is represented by as you can see, the comparatively low total units of 71 existing units and 3.2 units per acre. But a big part of the site appears developable, so that's a big opportunity there as well. So with the second strategy, there are several implications as well, starting with the impact of the town's sewage and water infrastructure. But this is not a new issue that's just being brought up with this strategy specifically. It actually presents an opportunity for us to consider various solutions for an issue that's been existing, such as considering private development, infrastructure improvements, and so on. Also, we can imagine how the town overall can improve connectivity to downtown for town residents, whether they're existing or new. And finally, we can consider how to best balance the needs for housing and boat parking, as you can see from the diverse location of where these sites are situated. So this is our way of imagining how this strategy could look like. Some references that we looked at are Northampton, Massachusetts, and some proposed plans of Cape Elizabeth in Maine. And these towns, we thought, like Manchester, could really preserve their town character while expanding the whole of their town as well. So overall, these are the sites that I just covered. I know this was a lot of information. Just as you can see on the slide, we've looked at the area around the train station, Summer Street, Bridge Street, Sawmill Circle, School Street, and Old Essex Road. And they're all located within and outside the half-mile radius. And I just wanted to repeat that, these two strategies really represent the two ends of the spectrum. And the sites could be reconfigured, or we could even love to hear your feedback on what sites could be added or should not be considered at all in terms of meeting the act requirements, but also actually reflecting your vision of the town moving forward. So we would just love to pose that question back to you and hear from you. And I know, just wanted to reiterate, this was a lot of information, so thank you for sticking with us and letting us talk and just go over our strategies. But we really thank you for engaging with us this evening and so far. These are some additional questions that we would also like to ask you. You're welcome to share your thoughts right now or respond to this to a survey that I will share the link for in the next slide. We'll also share the link on the chat as well. So if you're joining by Zoom, you're more than welcome to go to the chat and click the link. If you want to use this QR code, you can actually take out your phone right now. If you put your phone camera closer to the QR code and take a picture, it will lead you to the link as well. And this is just for us to gain some idea of your feedback. You're welcome to put as little, as much information you'd like to share. So I'll leave that on for just a bit more. If we move to a different slide, you can also reference the link in the chat as well.
And the students will certainly make these slides available to view afterwards.
That would be great.
That would be
Yes.
great. Yeah, the graphics are terrific. Thank you very much.
I wasn't able to share that, but we'll also share these slides with you all, so you can access this information.
Okay, well, thank you very much. That was very provocative. I think part of this we've agreed with you on, and part of it I'm sure we're surprised. We probably don't agree on some of the numbers, exact numbers, but I think the basic concepts are very good. I see Gar has already got his hand up, and why don't we start with Gar to ask a question?
Okay, I'll ask my question. It's brief. What level of certainty do you have that your option 1 and option 2 do indeed conform to the statute?
Very high certainty. We've been shown some models and somebody in the past will speak to it more, but we played around with the numbers a lot and are pretty sure it would meet the requirements.
Yeah, so we of course had to make certain assumptions about zoning changes. To start in the compliance model, we made the least amount of changes. So we assumed the current zoning that is in each of these sites, and we a major change would be that you could build by right up to 15 units an acre. That's going to be required by the law. And probably another major change would be the minimum lot size. So in many areas, we did have to change those two things. We acknowledge that we want to spend more time thinking about how to zone the smallest lots, mainly the ones that overlap with your general district. And as a concept, I think that we can continue to work on the sites that we've identified and figure out zoning, parameters that are going to work with your town. But we've listed what we assumed right now, in this, additional slide.
Great, thank you. That's helpful. I hesitate to say this, but you haven't thought about just sort of calling up the state and saying, hey, what do you guys think? Does this comply or not? We're not speaking for Manchester or anything like that, but
We haven't called up the state, but we are fortunate to have some very expert Massachusetts housing specific experts here in our department.
great.
Sandy,
I have a question about how you thought about the zoning rules for the districts you outlined. So what you just showed, let me be sure I understood the slide that you just showed us. So in all the districts you outlined, you would have a maximum, it would be zoned to have 25 units per acre.
15.
No,
Okay, help me understand then how you,
Yes.
in terms of the zones that you outlined, how did you think about what the density, allowed density would be?
so in essence, wherever our sites overlap with the general district, we had to, many of those parcels in the general district, as you already know, are quite small. There's a feature of the compliance model that only counts a site if you can build 3 or more units on it. So
Correct.
this is something that we want to certainly spend more time on. I just want to reiterate that. But in order to make those sites, count towards our compliance model, we thought we can increase the density maximum, but then limit the total number of units built per parcel, so that if you have a larger parcel, you wouldn't be able to, reach that 25 units an acre density. We can perhaps we can certainly, as we said, we'll share this with you. To answer your question more directly, those, the bottom half of the slide where it says minimum lot size 3,000 feet, 25 units an acre, those are only for areas that overlap with the general district. So I think this points to something that we would, going forward, we would focus on really what could the general district look like? Perhaps does this call for simply an overlay approach, or does this call for, a broader question of what are the new general district requirements? Because as I said, the difference in lot sizes really creates a, you need to have 2 different approaches for zoning for the smaller lots and the bigger lots.
Yeah. The tricky piece is, I think, that zoning to some degree is a blunt tool. And what we're trying to do here is to preserve the units we have and preserve the variety of structures that you've seen and shown in the presentation. And so that is a tricky thing to do with zoning.
Absolutely. And actually, one thing I wanted to point out is in this compliance model, which we just want to acknowledge that the compliance model, as you just said, is like a very blunt kind of measurement of, are you complying with the state's requirements or are you not? So of course, if you go through the compliance model and you make sure everything is checked, I believe that the state is going to do the same thing and they're going to say, great, 2 thumbs up. But it's, in terms of meeting their intention, you have to make, pull out 25 units an acre. Where does that come from? But what I really want to say was we assumed in all of this that we would have a maximum building height at 2.5 stories. And I think that's quite a conservative estimate. And so in returning to these parameters, we would want to think about what would 4 look like. Of course, with the appropriate lot size and the appropriate, setbacks and these other zoning parameters. So we like to think of this as a conservative estimate of with somewhat a bit of massaging of the current zoning, you can actually meet the compliance requirements relatively easily. Now, we haven't gotten into a whole community meeting yet and shown this to the public, so maybe I don't want to speak ahead of myself yet, but.
You don't.
Yeah. Okay, I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, yeah, Denny.
Question for you. Have you modeled the impact of what, on traffic?
No, we have not modeled that yet. We are really interested in transportation, and so that is another step that we need to start thinking about more as the semester goes on.
Sure that.
They haven't looked at it yet.
Also, can we get a copy of this deck, the slide deck?
Certainly, yes.
That'd be helpful. Thank you.
Sarah's got a question.
Sarah, yes.
When we've been looking at various zones, we were staying away from the Bridge Street area because our concern is that's a large portion of our historic district and has a lot of single-family homes, and to increase the density, we were concerned that it would adversely impact that section of the historic district. Any thoughts?
Yeah, that's good to keep in mind.
Hard to hear you.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, that's great to keep in mind. I think when we were looking at this site as well, that was a concern that was a concern that we also thought about. But this is kind of the feedback that we were looking from you to kind of confirming, okay, like this is a site that seems appropriate, but based on your experiences in Manchester, I think it definitely reflect to the other sites or modify the site as well.
Could you repeat that again more slowly?
It's very difficult to hear you. When you had the mic near you before, it worked much better.
Sure, yeah. To amplify what the students were saying is there's really trade-offs in any site here, right? You've got surface parking, which on the one hand seems underutilized, but also is very important to the businesses downtown, right? That's one tension. The boat parking, of course, is important for the harbor. The existing single-family homes is important. So ultimately, these tensions really do need to be navigated through design. And the students up to now really have been talking about the zoning planning parameters, but they're, if I may speak for them, eager to think about the ways that these tensions can be navigated, maybe not through zoning, as you said, but also through, well, appropriate design.
Right. I would argue, I would suggest also that Washington Street has significantly interesting single-family homes that I personally would not like to see turned into multifamily of almost any design, but they're just.
It's historic
It's
district.
historic district, and it's part of what is important to the character of the town. So that, my other question on your School Street segment, that includes a church and the parking lot for a church. And I don't know whether a church parking lot is excluded, but I'm pretty sure that the church and the parish hall would be difficult to develop.
I think they're exempt.
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 You said today they were.
Yeah. Just a comment, I want to respond to something you just said about parking and underline how very true that is. One of the the topics that elicits a big response, almost as big as dogs on the beach, is parking. So any solutions you can, any ideas about how to navigate that tension would be terrific and very much appreciated.
Thank you for that feedback.
Can't hear.
Yeah, thank you for all of that feedback. We're just taking this all in. So if you have any other comments, feel free to let us know.
Thank you.
Any other? No?
I think we're good.
Okay, well, I'll tell you what, we'll get back to you with some more specific feedback and let you know how we're trying to wrestle with these things as well. And I think we'd appreciate your help as we go through this, the next iteration of this. Unfortunately, our schedule doesn't match yours very well, which is a little bit of a problem. So we have November coming up with the holidays and so forth, and it's going to be difficult for us to move too much further along until probably the semester is almost over.
Hopefully we can provide a lot of food for thought as you guys get more into things in the spring then.
Good.
Great.
Great.
Do they know about self-signaling?
Terrific,
Oh,
terrific.
Yeah,
work.
actually, Sandy just raised a point. One, you talked about some development outside the 1/2 mile radius. And one of the things we're thinking about is on the other side of 128 on School Street is a district called the Limited Commercial District. And that district right now is fairly underutilized. There is a athletic club there, and there's some storage facilities and a doggy daycare and things like that.
Doctor's office.
Some doctor's offices. But there is a proposal in front of the town right now by a large company that wants to develop their headquarters there in a large facility which may over time grow to something like 500 workers.
Biotech company.
It's a biotech company called Cell Signaling. And we're wondering whether one of the things we should be thinking about is providing workforce housing for that company as a way of supporting their need for workers and doing it in the LCD, maybe certainly not the entire district, but a part of it anyway. And I wonder if you might be interested in thinking about that as a possibility.
Yeah, we certainly would be, and I came to the town forum that you had the other week and heard you all mentioning that then, and we were curious to hear more about your thoughts on that. So that's helpful input for us as we shift maybe away from potentially the Bridge Street site and think about other ways to have that large contiguous rezoned district.
And one other thing I think I would mention is that you asked what our concerns are, or our wishes are for this. And I think what the overriding thing I think that the town wants is to maintain its diversity. And
In housing.
in housing, well, in housing and architectural style and all of it.
We don't have any other kind of diversity.
No.
So let's, we need to be honest.
Well said. Perhaps we encourage some kind of diversity, sociological diversity as well. So one of the keys we think to making this happen is a very strong set of design controls, including something to delay demolition and establish design standards that any developer would have to follow. So I'm sure no matter what we come up with, that's going to be a key part of it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that as well. And we'll keep that all in mind as we keep working.
Okay, any other questions? Should we, guess just leave it there? And
I do have a quick question, may I?
yeah, certainly, Gar.
Do you think that that new development, if it occurs, needs to look historic in order to fit in?
The LCD, you mean?
Well, let's say around the train station where a lot of this, could happen. Do you think that the new development needs to look like it was old, or if it's appropriately scaled and, as you said, has the right design controls and the massing is appropriate and has compelling open spaces, is that enough?
Well, it's hard to answer, but
That's for
probably
them.
it's enough.
I think the question is for
Yeah, I don't
them.
think the design guidelines would be to make new developments look old, but to make the form of the new developments
Blend in.
blend in with what had been there before.
Yeah. The way 12 Summer Street does.
Parts of 12, sorry, I mean,
6 and 8.
6 and 8.
Yeah. 4, 6 and 8.
12, not so much.
Got it.
Is there a counter opinion?
Oh, gosh. What I can certainly say is that it shouldn't look like Rantoul Street in Beverly.
And I
That looks
think
too modern.
I think the student group picked up on that themselves based on their graphics.
Yes.
Yeah. There's a lot of people talk about it as preserving the character of the town.
Do we want it pickled or smoked?
Right. Smoked.
Okay, are we done?
Okay, well, thank you very much. I think that wraps it up.
Yeah, terrific job.
Yeah, that was a great job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now they're gonna eat pizza.
Oh, good.
Oh, could you send some this way?
Thank you so much. Have a
Thank
great
you.
evening.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
3.1% was a whole circle.
Including the water.
Oh,
Including the water of the wetlands.
everything.
And we still have that 39 acre versus 37 acre.
Yeah, and the 585 versus
Not that it's gonna make a
555.
huge difference.
Do we know?
I gotta look at it again.
So we know that the state in their publication said 37, but the model, if you go into the computer model, says 39. So it's a state discrepancy that someone has to get worked out.
Isn't there also a discrepancy in the number of units?
Well, that's based
Well,
on the acreage.
that's the math, so 15 times.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
one
That's
versus
30
the other.
units.
Right.
Okay, shall we move on with the agenda?
Yeah.
So I've been discussing with Emily Innes, our consultant, a time when we can have a kickoff meeting and get this thing going with her involvement.
Mhm.
So I had hoped that we could do it on November 6th because she had an opening that day, but unfortunately that it conflicts with a number of other things, and so that's not gonna happen. So she offered some dates.
Okay.
She offered the mornings of November 1st, the 16th, or the 27th, or the evenings of the 28th or 30th.
Can you go slower?
Yeah,
11:1.
11/1, 11/16, or 11/27 in the morning.
When do
16
you
and
say
27 in the morning are fine for me.
in the evening?
And the evenings, 11/28 or 11/30.
Either one of those is fine. The only one that's tough for me is the first.
My opinion would be to try and do it sooner rather than later, I mean, the 16th
Yeah.
maybe.
Okay, November 16th?
And that's in the morning?
Yeah, let's say 10
That's a
o'clock in the morning?
Thursday, I think it's a Thursday.
Anytime is okay by me.
10 o'clock?
Yeah.
Who else would we like to have attend that meeting?
One meeting, but someone from the board can, but you have to.
We have to.
Well, we can invite the select board and the planning board.
We can invite
and-
members of
And
the,
whoever.
well, we can
come,
invite the whole, it'll be a public meeting,
Right.
obviously, so.
Yeah.
But we can, yeah, we can. And of course, how about from the town staff? Besides Greg, of course.
I don't know.
The town planner.
The town, well, he is the town planner.
He is currently serving in that role.
Yeah, I don't see there would be anybody right now from the staff.
Okay,
You might suggest to Greg that he think about, because one of the things that he is planning to retire in a year and a half. And he is looking for people who might be interested in succeeding him. And he might have people who ought to be involved in this.
yeah, that's interesting, okay.
That's something he can decide, right?
Yeah, just so, when you invite him, suggest that if there's anybody else who.
I'm not sure if he's on this meeting, I don't see him here.
He
think
was.
he's on.
He was.
Gar, yes, Gar?
Just saying, I think Greg is listening to us.
I'm here.
No,
I
okay.
don't hazard an opinion on whether or not he wants to do it. I would say, by the way, on the 16th, I can do it as long as it's over by noon. But otherwise, not.
Okay,
I had an MBTA, a communications meeting scheduled from 9:30 to 10:30. But
Well, we can move that.
move it earlier, yeah.
Move that.
Okay, so that's.
So if I can, Chris,
yes, Greg?
so I do think it'd be helpful to get as many planning board members and select board members to a presentation that Emily makes. Because I think she can provide, a good amount of detail to the compliance model and how it will work. And I think that'll be important for a wider audience to understand.
Is there anybody else from town employees that should be included?
I'll think about that, but
Okay.
yes. Yeah, we may well have an interim planner on board by then.
Okay.
That'd be great.
Yeah, that would be great.
And I think, Greg, we could also plan for an evening meeting later on that month for people who can't make the 16th.
So do it back up for the 28th or the 30th.
Yeah.
But you don't want two identical meetings.
No, I'm sure they'd be different because things will have happened.
Well, that evening's a public forum, right?
Which evening?
The 16th?
The 6th is the public meeting.
No, it's the 8th.
8th, I'm sorry, the 8th.
Chris, you really think a lot's gonna happen between the 16th and the 28th?
I don't think
No,
so.
I don't know.
And the 28th is a planning board meeting, correct?
28th of November?
Right.
I think so. Third, is that a?
The 27th.
It's the 27th.
27th.
Well, she may give
Monday,
us
the
some guidance
27th.
as to
Thank you,
what she
Gail.
thinks is.
Anything in the morning, I don't think you'll get three.
28th is
three
the
planning
Affordable
board
Housing
members
Trust
working.
meeting.
Say again?
If you do a morning meeting, if you're inviting the planning board, I think 3 members will not be able to make it. So, but that's, at least, that's what I've been,
Part of it is.
Sarah, Laura, and myself have jobs.
Yeah,
so.
that's right.
Yeah, but waiting until the end of
I
November
wouldn't
to
wait,
start.
yeah, no, I wouldn't wait, but I'm just telling
That's
you.
why I'm suggesting maybe we could do
Is it,
something slightly different on the 28th. And
Well, there's,
if it's a
there's-
hybrid meeting?
on the 28th is Affordable Housing Trust meeting. And on the 29th is supposed to be a joint FinCom and Select Board meeting.
how
on
about the
capital
30th?
budget. I don't think there's anything on the 30th.
Okay.
And that's 2 weeks away, so maybe it
Yeah,
will
it
be
might work.
different.
Okay,
Oh, I see. So
Do you want us to reserve that evening? On the
yes,
30th?
yes,
time?
please. Say 6:30.
Okay.
What evening is that, Chris?
The 30th
Okay,
and Gar the 16th at 10 o'clock in the morning.
okay.
Okay, well, that's good. Okay, next on the agenda, approval of minutes of the 12th of October. Motion to approve them,
I have a minor change.
okay?
The minutes state that, that I stated that making zoning changes does not mean things will be built in the town. Actually, I kind of said the opposite. That we should think as if, I was cautioning against taking that message heavily in our meetings, so.
Okay.
Would appreciate having that reversed.
Gail, can you make that happen?
I will make that happen. You can approve them as, and I will put that edit in for Richard to approve.
Okay,
I move to approve the minutes as amended by Richard.
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Public comment, so I'm gonna open this up and see what folks out in the Zoom world have to say. Any questions, comments? I guess everybody's happy, that's great.
Speechless.
People are speechless, that's right. Okay, we don't have anything else, any other administrative matters, I think we're,
Move to adjourn.
we have a second?
I would have one thing, Chris.
Okay, Gar,
Okay.
yes,
That is, I will say, I think we should let Emily know that her availability is critical to us. And that for her to tell us, I can meet on certain days, starting 2 weeks from now, is not the ideal response that we're hoping for in terms of customer service. When we interviewed her, she said, don't worry, I have time and I can serve your needs. We have needs, but they're not stretched over too long a period of time. We are going to need her to be available to us. And if, I know she's the only sheep in the pasture, so we don't have a lot of choices here. On the other hand, I think it's only fair to us and to her to say, for her to say, yes, I know I've been selected, and the first time I can meet with you is 2 weeks from now, isn't exactly great. Okay, I think we ought to manage our consultants if we're going to pay her $50,000 or whatever it is we're paying her. She's got to be able to carve out time for us.
But Gar, to be fair, she did say she was available November 1st, which is next week.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, I mean, some of it is all the schedule juggling of all the folks in the room here.
Well, that's true, but to say November 1st and here are 3 dates, I can be
so Garsh, when I talked to her, she suggested November 6th. And so I brought that to the zoning group this morning and found out that no one could do the 6th, and so.
Okay, well, I'm simply saying, she's one person, we're,
Point taken.
15, so I think we need to sort of say, we really need to have some recognition here.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah, if I can just jump in quickly, she, it just takes her a little time to her schedule does, takes a little time to juggle and get up to speed for a new group. And so she said, if you can, the further out, she will definitely accommodate.
Is her contract done, by the way? Did we ask?
No, Greg, has she returned the contract signed?
Yeah, yes, it's signed.
Okay. So
Great, terrific.
good. It's best news of the day. Okay. We have a motion to adjourn has been seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you all.